Unexpected encounters. Julian Reed's eyes glazed over as the 38th candidate of the day droned on about disruption and synergy. At 42, he had built Vertex Technologies from his garage into a $4.8 billion empire, but success had turned into a gilded cage. The annual Vertex Innovation Fellowship interviews, normally his favorite tradition, felt particularly hollow this year. "Thank you for your time," Julian said, cutting the candidate off mid-sentence. The young man looked startled but gathered his things and left. Olivia Chen, his executive assistant, raised an eyebrow. "That's the fourth one you've dismissed early. The board won't be pleased if we don't select anyone." Julian loosened his immaculate tie and glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Seattle headquarters. Rain streaked down the glass, mirroring his mood. They all blur together. Olivia, Harvard, Stanford, MIT polished, resumes and rehearsed answers. Where's the spark? The genuine innovation? "There's one more today," Olivia said, checking her tablet, though she's unconventional. "Oh, so Dahlia Winters, 29. No degree from any prestigious university. Self-taught programmer. Currently manages a community tech workshop in Portland." Julian frowned. How did she make it past the screening committee? Her application included a prototype that impressed the technical team, plus Rohan advocated for her. Julian nodded slowly. Rohan Mehta, his chief innovation officer, had an eye for raw talent. "Send her in." Julian expected to feel nothing the same polite detachment he'd perfected over decades of business dealings. What he didn't expect was the peculiar jolt when Dahlia Winters entered the room. She wasn't conventionally striking medium height, with unruly chestnut hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing a simple blue dress that looked out of place among the tailored suits that had paraded through all day. But something about her presence, confident yet unassuming, made the cavernous meeting room feel suddenly smaller. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending her hand. Her voice had a melodic quality, tinged with nervousness. "Thank you for this opportunity." Their handshake lasted a fraction too long. Julian cleared his throat, motioning to the chair across from him. "Ms. Winters, your background is unusual for our fellowship." "You mean I'm not what you expected?" she replied with a small smile. "I get that a lot." Instead of launching into a rehearsed pitch, Dahlia set a worn leather portfolio on the table. "May I show you something?" Julian nodded, intrigued despite himself. She opened the portfolio, revealing sketches and diagrams alongside lines of code. "This is Project Firefly. It's an open-source platform that teaches coding to kids in underserved communities." As she walked him through her creation, Julian found himself leaning forward. Her passion was evident in every gesture, every carefully chosen word. Then he saw a small symbol in the corner of one page, fractured hexagon with a sakura blossom at its center. Julian froze, his mind catapulting back 14 years, too. A tiny innovation lab in Tokyo where he'd spent 6 grueling months trying to save his fledgling company. The same symbol had been graffitied on the wall outside his apartment, the mark of an underground tech collective that had unexpectedly helped him when he was at his lowest point. "Mr. Reed, are you all right?" Dahlia asked, concern etching her. Features. Julian blinked, returning to the present. "Yes, fine." "That symbol, what does it mean to you?" Dahlia's expression shifted subtly. "It's just something I've drawn since I was a teenager. A personal signature of sorts." She tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Julian lied, his heart racing. "Please continue." Hidden connections. The morning after meeting Dahlia Winters, Julian found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, researching someone out of personal curiosity. His penthouse office was bathed in early light as his fingers moved across multiple screens, pulling up everything he could find about the woman who had inadvertently resurrected ghosts from his past. Dahlia's digital footprint was modest but distinctive. A respected figure in Portland's grassroots tech scene, founder of 3 small community initiatives, few published articles on ethical programming. Nothing that explained the fractured hexagon symbol or any connection to Tokyo. Julian rubbed his temples, remembering those desperate months 14 years ago. Vertex had been on the verge of collapse after losing a critical investor. He'd flown to Tokyo alone, operating out of a cramped apartment, surviving on convenience store meals. And determination. The local tech scene had initially been impenetrable till he'd encountered the Sakura Collective, a secretive group of brilliant programmers who shared that distinctive hexagon symbol. One member in particular, a young woman who called herself Kira, had provided the algorithmic breakthrough that ultimately saved his company. They'd spent countless nights coding together in a 24-hour cafe. Her face always partially obscured by a surgical mask, common in Tokyo but convenient for anonymity. When his fortunes turned and Vertex secured its future, Kira vanished, leaving only a note. Some flowers bloomed twice. Intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. The board is waiting in conference room A, Olivia reminded him. Tell them I'll be 5 minutes late, Julian replied, closing the screens. When he entered the boardroom, 12 expectant faces turned toward him. Rohan Mehta, looking impeccable in his designer suit despite the early hour, raised an eyebrow, questioningly. Well, asked Victoria Blackwell, the sharp-tongued chairwoman. Have you selected this year's fellows? Julian took his seat at the head of the table. Dahlia Winters will join as our innovation fellow. The room erupted in murmurs. Victoria's perfectly lined lips pressed into a disapproving frown.
Oh.
The community workshop. Woman. Julian, we have candidates from Google, from Tesla. My decision is final, Julian said quietly, his tone brooking no argument. Rohan's team vetted her technical skills. Her perspective is exactly what Vertex needs right now. After the meeting, Rohan cornered him in the hallway. She's talented, no question, but this isn't like you, Julian. She typically deliberate for weeks. Julian avoided his friend's searching gaze. Sometimes you just know. 2 days later, Dahlia arrived for her first day. Julian watched from his office as Olivia showed her around the Innovation Lab, a sprawling wonderland of cutting-edge technology where fellows develop their projects. Dahlia's wide-eyed amazement was evident even from a distance. Later that afternoon, he found himself drawn to the lab, ostensibly to welcome the new cohort. Dahlia was already deep in conversation with the engineering team, her hands animatedly describing some concept, while the senior engineers nodded with unexpected respect. Ms. Winters, Julian said, approaching the group. Settling in well. Turned, surprise flickering across her expressive face. Mr. Reed? Yes. Everyone's been incredibly welcoming. Walk with me, he suggested, gesturing toward the glass-enclosed garden that served as the building's centerpiece, as they strolled among carefully curated Japanese maples and bubbling water features. Julian struggled to maintain his professional demeanor. Close. There were moments when her mannerisms, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, her slight hesitation before speaking seemed hauntingly familiar. Tokyo's beautiful in autumn, he said suddenly. The maple leaves turned the most extraordinary shades of red. Dahlia looked at him curiously. I've never been, actually. Though I've always wanted to visit. Never. Julian pressed, studying her. Reaction never, she confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. Why do you ask? No reason, Julian said, though his mind was racing. Either she was lying, or the connection was more complex than he'd imagined. Tell me about your project Firefly. How do you plan to scale it? As Dahlia enthusiastically outlined her vision, Julian noticed a thin silver chain around her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. At one point she leaned forward, and a small pendant slipped into view, a cherry blossom carved in pale jade. Julian's heart nearly stopped. Kira had worn an identical pendant, a family heirloom, she'd said. Mr. Reed, Dahlia was looking at him with concern. You seem distracted. The pendant, he said, unable to help himself. It's unusual. Dahlia's hand moved to it self-consciously. Oh, this. It belonged to my mother. She passed away when I was 16. A shadow crossed her face. This all have left of her. Julian nodded, mind whirling with possibilities. Could Dahlia be related to Kira somehow? A younger sister, perhaps? The timing would be right. Your mother, he said carefully, was she by chance involved in technology? Or perhaps spent time in Japan? Something in Dahlia's expression shifted, a barely perceptible guardedness. My mother was a high school art teacher in Oregon all her life. Why all these questions about Japan, Mr. Reed? Julian recovered quickly, offering a practiced smile. It's just making conversation. And please, call me Julian. We're less formal with our fellows here. As they parted ways, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that beneath Dahlia's straightforward answers lay something unspoken, a mystery that somehow connected to his past and possibly his future. Creative revelations 3 weeks into the fellowship, Dahlia had become a disruptive force at Vertex in all the best ways. Her Project Firefly had evolved under the company's resources, expanding from simple coding education to an entire ecosystem that made technology accessible to underserved communities. Julian found himself inventing reasons to visit the innovation lab, drawn like a moth to the creative energy that seemed to radiate from Dahlia's corner workspace. Her area stood in stark contrast to the minimalist aesthetic of Vertex Colorful. Sticky notes created a chaotic constellation around her monitors. Handwritten code snippets and drawings covered every surface, and various half-built prototypes cluttered her desk. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Julian arrived to find Dahlia alone in the lab, surrounded by holographic projections displaying complex network architectures. "Don't you ever go home?" Julian asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee from the artisanal cafe across the street. Dahlia looked up, startled out of deep concentration. Her face brightened when she saw him, says the man whose car is still in the parking garage at midnight most days. She accepted the coffee gratefully. "Besides, this doesn't feel like work." Julian settled into a chair beside her, closer than professional boundaries might dictate. "Show me what you're working on." Dahlia's fingers danced through the projection, manipulating code structures with the grace of a conductor. "I've been thinking about the fellowship proposal, democratizing AI tools for creative communities, but I've hit a conceptual wall." "Explain," Julian said, genuinely interested. "Well, the traditional approach would be creating simplified interfaces for existing AI frameworks." She began, then hesitated. "But I think that's fundamentally wrong." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Wrong how?" "It's patronizing," Dahlia said, with unexpected passion. "It assumes creative people can't understand technical complexity. What if instead we've built AI systems that work the way artists naturally think, systems that understand metaphor, improvisation, the beautiful accidents that lead to innovation?" As she outlined her vision, Julian was transported back to late nights in that Tokyo cafe, where Kira had challenged his entire approach to technology with similar conceptual leaps. The parallels were uncanny, not just in the thinking, but in the animated way. Dahlia's hands moved as she spoke, the slight furrow between her brows when she concentrated. "That's not how the industry approaches AI development," Julian said carefully. "Exactly why it needs to change," Dahlia countered, unintimidated. "The tech world keeps building tools for people who think like engineers. But what about the billions who don't?" Julian leaned forward, studying her. "This would require a fundamental redesign of our core frameworks." "Yes," she agreed simply. "Millions in R&D." "Yes." "The board would never approve it." Dahlia's expression fell slightly, but she nodded with understanding. "I know it's impractical for a fellowship project. I'll refocus on something more aligned with company priorities." Julian surprised himself with his next words. "I didn't say no." Later that evening, alone in his office, Julian accessed the secure server where he kept his most private files. He pulled up a folder he hadn't opened in years, Tokyo Archive. Inside were fragments of the code he and Kira had developed together, approaches to human-computer interaction that had been too radical, too ahead of their time to implement. He opened one Fila concept sketch labeled Intuitive Interface Theory and placed it side by side with Dahlia's current project proposal. The underlying philosophy was startlingly similar, though Dahlia's version was more evolved, as if the same seed had grown in different soil. Julian's phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Board dinner in 30 minutes at Lumiere. Car waiting downstairs." He closed the files and stood, straightening his tie. As he gathered his things, his gaze fell on a small, framed photograph on his bookshelf, the only personal item in his otherwise austere office. It showed a younger Julian standing before Tokyo Tower, cherry blossoms swirling around him. The picture had been taken by Kira on one of their rare ventures outside the cafe. Her reflection was barely visible in a glass panel, just a blurry outline in those distinctive amber eyes. Julian picked up the photograph, studying it closely. For years, he'd told himself his fascination with Kira was merely gratitude for saving his company. With Dahlia's arrival stirring up the past, he was forced to confront a more uncomfortable truth. Whatever connection had sparked between them in Tokyo had been left unresolved, a thread of possibility severed prematurely, and now improbably. That thread seemed to be dangling before him again, connected somehow to a woman who claimed never to have set foot in Japan. Professional boundaries, this is completely inappropriate. Victoria Blackwell's voice cut through Julian's office like a steel blade. You've diverted significant resources to a fellow's project without board approval, circumvented standard R&D protocols, and now I hear you're personally collaborating with her? Julian maintained his composure, though inwardly he bristled at Victoria's tone. Dahlia Winter's project aligns perfectly with our 5-year innovation roadmap. As CEO, I have discretionary authority over the innovation fund. Victoria's perfectly. Manicured nails tapped against her tablet. This isn't about authority, Julian. It's about judgment. You've never behaved this way with previous fellows. He couldn't deny it. Over the past 6 weeks, his professional relationship with Dahlia had evolved into something more complex. Late-night brainstorming sessions. Shared meals disguised as project discussions. Texts exchanged outside work hours about ideas that couldn't wait until morning. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Couldn't ignore the electricity that charged the air when they worked together. The way time seemed to bend and flow differently in her presence. The project shows exceptional promise, Julian said firmly. Rohan agrees. We could revolutionize how creative industries interact with technology. Victoria's shrewd eyes narrowed. This isn't like you, Julian. You've built this company on calculated risks, not ... impulses. She paused meaningfully. People are talking. Let them talk, Julian replied, more sharply than intended. After Victoria left, Julian stood at his window, watching Seattle's skyline disappear into evening fog. His phone buzzed with a message from Dahlia. Breakthrough with the neural feedback loop. You have to see this. No, he should wait until tomorrow. Send Rohan instead. Attain distance. 20 minutes later, he was in the innovation lab. Dahlia looked up from her workstation, eyes bright with excitement despite the late hour. I solved the latency issue in the creative response framework, she said without preamble. Watch this. She demonstrated a fluid interaction between spoken, metaphorical instructions and the system's response painting. Digital art through poetic commands rather than technical specifications. It's understanding intention, not just keywords, Julian. Observed, genuinely impressed. Exactly. Dahlia beamed, the success making her normally reserved demeanor more animated. But that's not even the best part. She pulled up another screen showing the system's underlying architecture. Look familiar? Julian stared at the elegant solution she'd implemented. It was eerily similar to a theoretical approach he and Kira had sketched out years ago, but had lacked the technology to build. How did you... He began, then stopped himself. Dahlia misinterpreted his reaction as displeasure. I'm sorry, did I overstep? Accessed some of the company's archived research. While looking for precedents, there was this fascinating theoretical paper from 2011 about intuitive interfaces that seemed abandoned. I built on those principles. Julian felt a chill. Which archived research exactly? She pulled up the reference, a heavily redacted version of his Tokyo work that had been incorporated into Vertex's knowledge base years ago. No mention of Kira remained in the sanitized corporate document. This approach was revolutionary, Dahlia said admiringly. I don't understand why it was shelved. The technology wasn't ready, Julian said quietly. And the person who conceived, much of it disappeared. Something in his tone made Dahlia look at him more closely. You knew them? The original researcher? Before Julian could answer, Rohan appeared at the lab entrance. There you are, he said to Julian, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes communicated concern. The investors from Singapore have been waiting in conference room C for 15 minutes. Julian cursed under his breath. I lost track of time. Ms. Winters was showing me some breakthrough work. As Julian hurried out with Rohan, his friend muttered, "Victoria called me. She's concerned." "Victoria should mind her own business," Julian replied tersely. "It becomes her business when the CEO starts behaving erratically," Rohan countered. "Julian, I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you like this over anyone." Julian stopped walking. "Like what exactly?" Rohan sighed. "Distracted. Obsessive. You've missed 2 board calls this month. You're in the lab at all hours. Half your calendar is blocked off for project development with Dahlia. Her work is important." "Is that all this is? To work?" Rohan asked quietly. Julian didn't answer. Later that night, after the investors had gone, Julian returned to the lab on impulse. He found Dahlia still there, asleep at her workstation, head pillowed on her arms beside her keyboard. A half-empty cup of cold tea sat nearby. Her screen displayed family photos. She'd apparently been browsing Dahlia as a teenager with a woman who must be her mother. Their resemblance striking. Julian froze, staring at the image. Dahlia's mother had the same distinctive amber eyes as Kira. Suddenly, impossible connections began forming in his mind. The timing, the pendant, the intuitive understanding of concepts only one other person had fully grasped. The woman in the photo would be the right age now, if she had changed her name, started a new life in Oregon as an art teacher, ... double quotes Julian. He turned to find Dahlia awake, watching him with confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, embarrassed at being caught. "I came to check if you'd gone home." Dahlia straightened, quickly closing the photos on her screen. "It's just resting my eyes." She glanced at her watch and winced. "I didn't realize how late it was." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since they'd begun working together. "Your mother," Julian said finally, unable to contain the question burning inside him. "What was her name?" Dahlia looked surprised by the personal question. "Eleanor Winters." She tilted her head, studying him. "No reason," Julian said too quickly. "You should go home and get some real rest. Big presentation tomorrow." As he watched her gather her things, Julian wrestled with disappointment and confusion. Eleanor Winters. Not Kira. Had he manufactured connections that didn't exist, seeing ghosts from his past where there were none? Or was there still some piece of the puzzle he was missing? Walls crumbling, the crisis broke on a stormy Tuesday morning. Julian was in the middle of his quarterly strategy meeting when Olivia burst in, face pale. "Someone's breached our secure development server," she announced. "They've accessed the core architecture for Dahlia's project and several legacy systems." The room erupted in chaos. Within minutes, Julian had assembled Vertex's security team in the situation room. Screens displayed intrusion paths and compromised systems, among them the Tokyo archive. The breach originated internally. The head of security reported grimly, "Someone with high-level access." "Who?" Julian demanded. "We've traced it to Ms. Winters' terminal." Julian felt the floor shift beneath him. "That's impossible. The evidence is clear, sir. She's nowhere in the building. Security footage shows her leaving at 2:17 a.m. with an external drive." For one horrible moment, Julian felt 14 years of carefully constructed walls threatening to collapse. Had he been played so completely? Was Dahlia's appearance in his life, the similarities, the pendant, the intuitive understanding of his work, called an elaborate scheme to access Vertex's proprietary technology? "Find her," he ordered, his voice hard as steel. Now, hours passed. With no sign of Dahlia, her apartment was empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. As day turned to evening, Julian sat alone in his office, staring at the Tokyo photograph, feeling like a fool. The intercom buzzed. "Sir?" Olivia's voice was tentative. "Dahlia Winters is here. Security has detained her in the lobby." Reached the lobby, he found Dahlia, surrounded by security guards, looking exhausted and confused. "What's happening?" she asked when she saw him. "They won't let me go to the lab." "You know exactly what's happening," Julian said coldly. "The servers were breached last night from your terminal. You were seen leaving with company property." Dahlia's eyes widened. "What?" "No, I was." She stopped, seeming to realize how it looked. "Julian, I can explain everything." He led her to a small conference room, dismissing the security team, but leaving the door open. Then explain. Dahlia took a deep breath. Yesterday evening, I found something in the legacy code of vulnerability that could compromise the entire project. I tried to reach you and Rohan, but neither of you answered. The patch couldn't wait until morning. So you took matters into your own hands? Julian asked skeptically. Yes. I stayed late implementing the fix, then took a backup of the patched system home as a precaution. Standard procedure for critical updates. Without authorization? Authorization? She countered. The emergency protocol you implemented last month gives fellows autonomy in critical situations. She pulled out her phone, showing him the communication log. I documented everything. Julian frowned. Explanation was plausible, but doubt still gnawed at him. Here have you been all day? Here, Dahlia faltered. I had a family emergency. My aunt was hospitalized in Portland. I drove down at dawn. Convenient timing, Julian observed. Something flashed in Dahlia's eyes, hurt, but also a steely determination he recognized. Check my work, Julian. Every line of code, every system I touched. If I were stealing technology, would I have left? Such a clear trail? Would I have come back at all? Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Julian turned to the security team waiting outside. Escort Ms. Winters to the lab. Full monitoring. I want every keystroke verified. 3 hours later, Julian stood in stunned silence as Vertex's security chief explained their findings. Not only had Dahlia been telling the truth about the vulnerability, but her quick action had prevented a genuine external breach attempt that had triggered the security alerts. The coincidental timing had made her look guilty, so she saved us. Julian said quietly. Essentially, yes, the security chief confirmed. Without her patch, we'd be dealing with a real disaster right now. Julian dismissed the team and walked slowly to the lab where Dahlia sat alone. Still under guard, her face illuminated by monitor glow. You're cleared, he said simply. Dahlia didn't look up from her screen. Thank you for your trust, she replied. Her voice tinged with hurt. Julian dismissed the guard and closed the door behind him. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. When was the last time he'd apologized to anyone? I jumped to conclusions. Yes, you did. Dahlia finally looked at him, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Why? What made it so easy to believe I would betray you? The question hit Julian with unexpected force. 'Cause people leave, he said before he could stop himself. They take what they need and disappear. Dahlia stood, approaching him slowly. Is that what this has all been about? You're afraid I'll vanish like someone else did? Julian turned away, but Dahlia gently touched his arm. Julian, who was she? The walls he'd maintained for 14 years crumbled in an instant. Her name was Kira, at least that's what she called herself. We worked together in Tokyo when Vertex was nothing but an idea and a mountain of debt. She saved everything, my company, possibly my life. Then she disappeared without explanation. Understanding dawned in Dahlia's eyes. I remind you of her somehow. Julian nodded, feeling foolish yet relieved to finally speak the truth. The hexagon symbol in your work, your intuitive understanding of concepts only she grasped. Jade pendant, she wore one exactly like it. Dahlia's hand went to her necklace, her expression softening. My mother's pendant. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo. This is my mother, Eleanor Winters. Is she your Kira? Hey. Julian stared at the image of a smiling woman in her 40s, auburn hair streaked with gray. Kind eyes, an artist's paint-splattered apron. Not Kira. No, he admitted. A strange mixture of disappointment and relief washing over him. Different person entirely. Dahlia studied him thoughtfully. My mother spent a year in Japan before I was born. She never talked much about it, but she brought back this pendant, and the hexagon symbol became part of her artwork. After she died, I incorporated it into my designs as a way to keep her close. Julian's mind raced, connecting impossible dots. When was this? When was she in Japan? Around 2010, I think. She was part of an art collective in Tokyo. Julian pulled out his phone, showing her the reflection in his Tokyo photograph. Could that be her? It's not much to go on, ... Dahlia peered. At the image, her expression changing from curiosity to shock, That's definitely my mother. Younger, but it's her. She looked up at Julian, bewildered. She was your Kira? It appears so, Julian said softly. But that doesn't make sense. She was an art teacher in Oregon my whole life, except for that year in Japan, Julian pointed out. When she was part of a collective, understanding bloomed between them. The impossible connection that had drawn them together across time and circumstance. She never mentioned you, Dahlia said. Or Vertex. Perhaps she had her reasons, Julian replied. What matters is where we go from here. Dahlia took a step closer. And where is that exactly? Julian reached out, hesitantly brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've spent 14 years looking backward, Dahlia. It's building walls to protect myself from disappointment. Maybe it's time to look forward instead. I'm not my mother, Dahlia said softly. And you're not the struggling entrepreneur she knew.
Oh.
Julian agreed. We're entirely different people with our own story to write. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, rain lashing against the windows of the innovation lab. But inside, as Julian finally allowed himself to bridge the distance between them, felt like clearing skies after a lifetime of clouds. The hexagon symbol glowed on Dahlia's screen behind them, no longer a ghost from the past, but a bridge to something new.